"Can I buy you?" the little girl asked. The giant cowboy's heart-breaking answer left her in tears. The wind moved like an old man's breath across the dry plains. Dust lifted in lazy swirls. A broken fence leaned against the weight of years. Beyond it, the land stretched for miles, empty, sunburnt, and quiet. No birds, no cattle, just stillness. The cabin sat alone at the edge of the land, its wood bleached silver by time. The porch creaked when the wind touched it. A rusted horseshoe hung sideways above the door, as if it had given up trying to bring luck. Inside, the giant cowboy stirred. He wasn't called that because of his height, though he stood taller than most. It was his silence that made him feel larger than life. William had hands like shovels, shoulders like boulders, and eyes that never seemed to blink. But the size that weighed most heavily on him was the space inside, the hollow kind a man gets after burying too many people and not saying enough words. He sipped his black coffee from a tin mug, watching the horizon through the window. Nothing ever changed out there. And maybe that was the only reason he stayed. Then he heard it. A knock, but not on the door. It came from below. He stepped out onto the porch, boots thudding against the cracked wood. The sun stung his eyes. At first, he saw nothing but the light and the dust. Then she emerged, no taller than the fence rail. A little girl, barefoot, face smeared with dirt, holding something tight in both fists, maybe coins, maybe pebbles. She didn't cry, she didn't shake, but her lips trembled with something she hadn't learned how to name. William stepped down. They stared at each other in silence, two lost shapes carved by different storms. His hand twitched near the belt where his old gun used to hang, but there was no danger in her. Only need. She stepped forward and spoke. "Can I buy you?" The words hit like a stray bullet. Confusing, raw, too honest. He didn't answer. Couldn't. Not right away. Her voice was small, but her eyes weren't. They held years she hadn't lived yet. And in that quiet moment, as the wind circled back around them, the old cowboy knew this wasn't just a child asking for help. This was something deeper, something that would change everything. She stood there, still as a branch bent by storms, waiting for an answer that didn't come. William looked down at her, not just with his eyes, but with something deeper, something cracked and afraid inside him. Her clothes were torn at the hem. One sock hung loose. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear, but from cold, hunger, or maybe life itself. Still, she didn't beg. She only clutched that tiny bundle of coins tighter, like it meant something, like it could change her fate. He saw bruises along her arms, old ones, faded yellow and green. But it wasn't the bruises that broke him. It was her silence. Not a tear, not a whimper. Just that one question. "Can I buy you?" He turned his eyes to the land again, pretending to think. But really, he was looking back, years back. There had been another child once. A boy. Thin, quiet, just as lost. He remembered the sound of boots down a hallway. His father's voice, sharp as broken glass. The way his mother used to press a finger to her lips. "Shh. Don't cry. Don't speak." William had learned early that silence was safer than honesty, that small hands don't change big storms, and that men like his father only stopped when something inside them snapped. He had walked away once before, from his own blood, from a younger brother he never saw again. And now here she was. Different face, same silence. He crouched low, his knees cracking like dry wood, and looked her in the eyes. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice rough from years of disuse. She hesitated. Her mouth moved, then stopped. He tried again. "Who sent you?" Still nothing. Just that quiet wind brushing past her hair. His jaw clenched. He wasn't built for this. He knew cattle, rifles, rain patterns, not children, not questions without answers. Part of him wanted to send her away, give her water, tell her to walk down the road until she found someone better suited for saving, someone who hadn't already failed once. But that wasn't going to happen. He could feel it in the base of his spine, that ache of unfinished regret, that weight that never went away, no matter how many fences he mended or horses he broke. He stood up slowly. "You don't need to buy me," he said at last, the words catching in his throat. "But you can come in if you want." She blinked, didn't move. So he turned, walked up the steps, and held the cabin door open. And for one breathless moment, he wondered if he was doing the right thing, or just trying to fix something that could never be fixed. But then her feet moved, quietly, carefully. And as she stepped inside, the coins still clenched in her fist, William realized he wasn't just letting her in. He was letting something else in, too. Something he had locked out for a long, long time. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the crackle of dry wood in the stove. She sat on the edge of the old sofa, legs tucked under her, eyes watching everything, but saying nothing. William had placed a blanket over her shoulders and poured warm broth into a chipped bowl, but she hadn't touched it. The coins were still in her hand. She hadn't let go. By morning, he knew he had to ask. He set his coffee down, cleared his throat. "Did someone hurt you?" She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. But her fingers curled tighter around the coins, and her eyes, for the first time, welled up. That was enough. William didn't need details. He'd seen enough of this world to know the shape of a wound even when it didn't bleed. By noon, he saddled his horse. He had questions that needed answers, not from her, but from the world outside. Tea. The girl stayed behind with a piece of bread in her lap and a quiet stare that followed him out the door. He rode toward town, a day's ride and a memory away. It had been years since he'd passed through Riverton, but names still lingered like old stains, and it didn't take long before someone said the wrong one. "Girl that age?" the bartender muttered, rubbing the rim of a glass. "You talking about Chester Hart's property?" William froze. "Property?" The man shrugged. "That's what he calls her. Says she's not his daughter. Just something he paid for. Folks around here don't ask too many questions. Chester's the kind of man who don't like answers." William's jaw clenched. His knuckles turned white on the glass. Chester Hart. That name was dust and venom. A man who ran old trade routes, the kind of trade no decent man would speak of. He lived outside town, far enough for the law to forget him. Rumors said he kept girls, collected debt with fists, and buried trouble under barn floors. William knew now. She wasn't just lost. She had escaped. And it wouldn't be long before Chester came looking. He returned before dusk, heart pounding, eyes scanning the horizon. She was still there. Still silent. But when she saw his face, the tightness in it, the urgency, something in her posture changed. She sat up straighter. Her fingers, finally, opened. The coins spilled onto the floor. "Will he come?" she asked, voice cracking. William looked out the window. "He will." For the first time, her lips trembled not from cold but fear. He nodded slowly. "We won't run." Outside, clouds were building low on the horizon, dark and rolling, the kind that carried dust and thunder. Inside, he opened the old trunk under his bed. His gun lay there, untouched for years, wrapped in a towel beside his brother's silver belt buckle and a letter he never mailed. He picked it up. The weight was familiar. So was the feeling in his chest, the kind that came before everything broke loose. The storm wasn't just coming, it was already here. The next morning came heavy with silence. No birds, no movement in the trees, just the creak of the cabin as the wind pushed softly against it, like someone knocking without courage. Inside, the girl stood by the window watching the land. William sat by the stove, sharpening an old knife he hadn't used in years. He didn't speak, and she didn't ask. They were two souls sitting beside a fire neither of them knew how to tend. That day, he took her outside. The sky was dull, pale with warning, but the air held a strange calm. He handed her a small, empty rifle. No bullets, just weight and wood. "Hold it like this," he said, kneeling beside her. She looked at him, unsure. He placed her hands where they needed to be, adjusted her elbows, steadied her stance. When she finally aimed, something shifted. Her back straightened. Her breath slowed. She wasn't shaking anymore. He didn't say she did well, but she saw it in his nod. Later, he showed her how to make fire from dry bark and a steel striker. Her fingers fumbled. He didn't correct her, just waited. When the first spark caught, her eyes lit up like he'd handed her the sun. That night, they sat by the fire inside. Not close, but not far either. He cooked beans and tore bread in half, placing one piece beside her. She didn't thank him, but she ate slowly, like she wanted it to last. Then she asked quietly, "Did someone hurt you too?" William didn't answer right away. He stared into the flames. His thumb ran over a scar on his forearm, a long, pale one, shaped like lightning. "Once," he said, and then again, softer, more than once. She nodded, as if understanding was a language they both already spoke. Then she turned, pulled up the sleeve of her shirt, and revealed a line of cigarette burns along her shoulder. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. He didn't ask who. He just said, "No one's going to touch you here." And she believed him. They sat in silence for a long time. She leaned back against the wall, the blanket around her shoulders. He pulled his old coat tighter around himself and leaned into the shadows. Outside, the wind carried dust across the land, but inside, it felt like the eye of a storm, still, warm, temporary. Before sleep, she whispered, "You didn't ask my name." "I figured you'd tell me when it mattered." She paused. "It's Ruth." He nodded. "William." They didn't shake hands. They didn't smile. But something passed between them, a small bridge built from quiet understanding. That night, he left the door to her room half open, and she didn't close it. They came at dawn, 3 riders on dark horses, moving slow across the plain like death had no need to rush. Dust lifted behind them, silent and heavy, until it settled against the porch steps of the old cabin. William stood in the doorway, shotgun resting against his shoulder, face still as the land behind him. Ruth stood just inside, barefoot, her small hand gripping the doorframe. The man in the center dismounted first, tall, snake-thin, wearing a wide hat and a twisted grin. "William," he drawled, "didn't expect to see you out here still. Thought you vanished after—" He paused. "Well, after the mess in Carson County." William said nothing. The man stepped closer, boots crunching over dead grass. "We're here for the girl." Ruth's breath caught. "She's got something that don't belong to her," the man continued. "Belongs to Mr. Hart, and Mr. Hart don't like chasing things he owns." William shifted the shotgun slightly. "She's not a thing." The man chuckled. "You always were the noble type. That's what got your brother killed, wasn't it?" William's jaw clenched, but he didn't move. From behind the riders, a 4th man emerged, smaller, twitchy, eyes scanning fast. He carried a rope coiled at his side and a smirk that didn't belong on any living face. "You know how to—" "His ends, Cowboy," the first man said. "She comes with us. You walk away." "She stays," William replied, voice like gravel dragged across stone. The man sighed. "Then I guess you forgot what Hart does to folks who steal from him." William lowered the shotgun, not in surrender, but in warning. "I remember," he said. That's why I'm not letting her go. Tension cracked through the air like dry wood. Fingers twitched near triggers. The world held its breath. Then came the sound, a metallic click. But it wasn't William's shotgun. It came from behind him, from Ruth. She stood there, clutching the old revolver William had shown her once, trembling but steady. The same one he thought she hadn't touched again. Her voice was soft, but her words were ice. "You touch him, I shoot." The men laughed until they saw her eyes. There was no child in them now, only resolve. The leader spat to the side. "You're got no idea who you're dealing with." "No," William said, stepping forward, placing himself between Ruth and the men. "But I reckon you do now." And then he fired. The blast hit the dirt near the horses' hooves, scattering them backward. The horses reared. The twitchy man stumbled. Another drew too slow. William fired again, this one closer. The air filled with shouts, the scent of gunpowder, the thud of retreating hooves. When the dust cleared, one man lay groaning near the fence. The others galloped away, vanishing into the horizon. William lowered the shotgun, but his chest rose and fell too fast. A red bloom spread across his side. Ruth dropped the revolver and ran to him. "You're hit." He grunted, falling to one knee. Not the first time. She tried to hold him up, her tiny hands shaking. "You said you wouldn't let them take me," she cried. He touched her cheek, his voice barely a whisper. "And I didn't." Then darkness pressed in around him. But before it took him, he felt her arms wrapped tight around his shoulders, like he was something worth holding on to. The sun was rising when Ruth pulled the bloody towel tighter against his side. William's breathing was shallow, mouth slightly open, eyes fluttering with pain. He hadn't spoken since the gunfire stopped, just sat against the porch post, legs stretched, one hand pressed weakly to the wound. The land around them had returned to silence. But it wasn't peace. It was aftermath. Ruth sat beside him, knees tucked close, watching the horizon. Her small fingers had stopped shaking. Somewhere in that long minute between gunshots and collapse, something in her had hardened. She had not cried. Not yet. A crow circled overhead, low and slow, then passed beyond the tree line. In the distance, the man William had shot was gone, dragged away maybe, or limped off. No lawmen came, no shouts, just dust, scattered footprints, and the faint echo of hooves vanishing west. Ruth stood and walked into the cabin. She moved with purpose now, not like a child, like someone who'd seen what grown men feared and survived it. She boiled water, found old linen, dug through drawers until she found whiskey and thread. When she returned, William's head had tilted back, eyes closed. She touched his shoulder. He opened one eye. "Gonna sew you up?" she whispered. He gave the barest nod, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, then silence again. The needle moved. The wound closed slowly under her trembling but determined hands. When it was over, she sat on the floor beside him, head resting lightly against his arm. Hours passed. He didn't speak. She didn't ask if he would live. Some truths don't need asking. That night, rain came, sudden and soft, falling in whispers across the roof. Ruth lit a candle, placed it on the table and sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the flame. William lay in the bed, wrapped in blankets, breathing steady now. Thunder rolled somewhere far off, the kind that doesn't scare you, just reminds you that the world is still big. She got up quietly, walked to the porch and looked out to the darkness. The land was soaked, finally clean. The same rope they brought to take her still hung on the fence, wet and limp, forgotten. She walked out, cut it down, and tossed it into the fire. It hissed, blackened, and turned to smoke. When she came back inside, she picked up the coins she'd once held so tightly and laid them on the table. Then she whispered to no one, "I don't need these anymore." She climbed onto the edge of William's bed and curled into the space beside him. He didn't wake, but his hand found her back in his sleep, a reflex, soft and protective. The candle flickered, the wind outside quieted, and the two of them, a girl who had been sold and a man who thought he couldn't save anyone, breathed the same air, in the same room, under the same roof, for the first time as something more than strangers. Not quite family, not yet safe, but together. The seasons turned slow in that part of the world. Winter passed with a hush. The snow came only once, light and forgettable. Spring returned like a shy visitor, green buds peeking through hard soil, birds landing quiet before flying off again. And by summer, the land had softened. So had they. William never fully healed, not in the way doctors would measure. The wound in his side still ached when he leaned too far or lifted too much, but it no longer kept him in bed. It no longer kept him afraid. He spoke more now, not often, and never loudly. But when Ruth asked a question, he answered, and sometimes, late at night, when she'd crawl into the old rocking chair beside the window, he'd sit across from her with a worn book and read in a voice that cracked like old leather. She listened without blinking. She helped mend fences now, fed the horse, hung fresh laundry across the porch railing. Her hands grew steady. Her laughter came. Not often, and not loud, but enough to remind William what it sounded like. They planted a tree behind the cabin. Ruth picked it, a small willow, thin and drooping, like something that had cried once and was still standing. She dug the hole with her own hands. Liam poured water at the base and pressed the soil firm. They didn't say why they planted it, but they both knew. It stood where the men had once arrived. Years passed. No one came looking again. The girl who had once held coins in her hand like hope now held pencils and drew in the corners of old feed sacks. Faces, mostly. Sometimes his, sometimes hers. Sometimes a figure with a rope and no eyes. She never showed those to him, and he never asked. He built her a new room beside his. Nothing fancy, just wood and warmth. She painted the walls with wild colors that didn't match. He didn't stop her. Sometimes, when the wind was just right, she would hum a tune that had no words, and he'd listen from the porch with his eyes closed. They never talked about the night she arrived, or the name Chester Hart. But in the quiet spaces between chores, between meals, between long silences and slow growth, they built something. Not a family exactly, not forgiveness, but something that didn't need to be named to matter. And years later, when strangers passed the cabin and asked who lived there, locals only said, "A giant cowboy and a girl who once tried to buy him." And those who heard it would laugh. But those who knew, they didn't. They only nodded. Because some people don't get saved with words. Some get saved by staying, and others by being stayed for. The coins she once offered still sat on the shelf, untouched, unspent, shining quietly in the dark, like the price of love no one had to pay.